I have paid every man I ever owed, save one, and it turned out to be a woman. And for 9 years the not paying of it sat in my chest like a swallowed stone. I am an old man now, and men call me a hard one, and they are not wrong. I built the cross-H out of nothing but a borrowed rope and a mean streak, and I have foreclosed on softer men than me and slept fine after. But I have kept accounts my whole life. Every dollar lent me, every kindness done me, wrote down in a little tally I carried behind my ribs, and I have squared each one, because a man who does not pay what he owes is a man who owes his whole life to somebody, and I could not abide it. All but the one. And this is the story of how I finally went back and paid it, and how the paying of it gave me the only good years I ever had. It starts in a winter, the way the bad ones always do. I was young and I was ruined. I had put every cent I owned, and a good deal I had borrowed, into 200 head of cattle, and a notion that I could drive them north to the railhead before the snow. The snow did not wait on my notion. It came down out of the bighorns like the sky had given up, and by the third day my cattle were dead or scattered, and my 2 hired men had drifted off to save their own hides, and I was afoot with a played-out horse and a wet coat, and nothing in the world but the debt I had made. I walked because stopping was dying. I remember the walking more than anything. The way my feet had stopped being feet and gone to blocks of cold wood, I had to think about swinging forward, one and then the other, across a white country that had no bottom and no edge. I do not know how I came to the Ashby place. I have gone back over it 100 times and I cannot find the last mile of it in my memory. There is the walking, and then there is a light, a low yellow window and all that white, and then there is a door opening and a woman standing in it with a lamp, and the warmth of the room behind her rolling out over me like water, and me going down on her step with my legs finally quit. Her name was Nora Ashby, and she was maybe 22 years old that winter, and she did not scream or shut the door or send her man out with a gun, the way plenty would have at a stranger falling into their light. She got down beside me in the snow in her house dress, and she got a shoulder under my arm, and she called back into the house, sharp and steady, "Ellis, Ellis, come, there's a man." And between the two of them they got me up and got me in and got the door shut on that killing dark. Ellis Ashby was a lean, quiet homesteader with a bad leg, and a way of looking at you full and slow before he decided about you. He decided about me fast enough that night. He got my boots off my feet, and I will tell you, a man does not forget another man kneeling to pull the frozen boots off him. It is a thing sons do for fathers and fathers for sons, and no reason on God's earth for a stranger to do it. And Nora put a quilt around me and set to warming the feeling back into my hands between hers, rubbing, and it hurt like fire coming back, and I cursed. And she did not scold me for it. She only said, "That's good, that's the blood. Curse all you like." They had nothing. I want that understood because it is the whole of the matter. The Ashbys were not soft folk who could afford to be kind. Their homestead was a poor quarter section down on the Quill bottom, good enough ground when the river behaved and a ruin when it didn't, and that had been a hard year for them too. There was a baby coming, Nora was carrying, though I did not see it that first night, and there was a shelf in that cabin with about enough on it to see 2 people through to spring if the 2 people were careful, and I was a third mouth that had walked in out of the snow. She fed me anyway, that is the thing. She fed me out of the shelf that had to last, and when I came to my senses enough to understand it, on the second day, and I pushed the bowl back and said I couldn't take their stores, they'd want them. She took the bowl and set it back in front of me and looked at me with those level gray eyes and said the thing I carried the rest of my life. She said, "A body that won't eat because it's proud is just a slow way of doing what the snow tried to do. Eat." So I ate. I stayed 11 days. My feet had gone bad in 2 toes, and Ellis lanced them and Nora dressed them, and I ran a fever some, and they gave me their own bed and slept the 2 of them by the stove, and I was too sick those first days to fight them on it. When the fever broke I mended fast. I was young and hard-made even then, and I did what work a man can do on a homestead in deep winter, hauling and mending and breaking ice on the stock water, to pay down some small part of what I was eating. But it was never a fair trade, and we all knew it, and it galled me worse every day, this account running up in me that I could not square. On the last evening, when the weather had broke enough that a man could travel, I stood in that little cabin and I made them the promise. I told Ellis Ashby I would send money the moment I had it, and I told him I would send more than the food was worth. I would send it 10 times over, because they had saved a life, and a life is not a thing that has a fair price, and I would spend the rest of mine trying to pay toward it. I meant it the way you mean a thing at 23, which is with your whole chest, and no idea yet how the world folds a man's promises up and puts them in a drawer. Ellis just nodded, slow in that full way of his. But Nora was standing at the stove with her hand resting on the shelf of her that the baby was making, and she shook her head at me, and she smiled, and she said, "You don't owe us, Mr. Hartigan. You pay it on down the line. Someday there'll be somebody in the snow at your door. That's how it gets paid." I did not understand her then. I thought it was just a kind thing to say to a proud man to let him leave easy. I know now she meant every word of it, and that she was a wiser soul at 22 than I was at 50, and that it took me half a life to learn what she'd handed me in one sentence at a stove. I left in the morning. Ellis staked me. That is the part that still gets me. A poor homesteader with a baby coming staked a ruined stranger, gave me a sound horse of the 2 they had and $11, which was near everything loose in that house, and told me to send it back when I could and not to fret if I couldn't. I rode out of the Quill Bottom into a hard, bright morning with my whole life in front of me, and I did not once look back at that cabin, because I was young and it was behind me and everything was ahead, and that is the great sin of being young, that you do not turn in the saddle and fix a thing in your mind while it is still there to be fixed. I meant to pay them within the year. I want you to believe that. But a ruined man does not unruin himself in a year. It took me 4 just to get level, 4 years of line camp wages and busted knuckles and living on nothing, and by the time I had $11 I could spare and a good deal besides, and rode back down to the Quill to pay Ellis Ashby his money and to sit at his table and tell him what his wife's kindness had made possible. By that time they were gone. The cabin was empty. The Quill had come up bad 2 springs running and taken the bottom ground, is what a man at Harmon's Ford told me, and the Ashbys had given it up and moved on, and no, he didn't rightly know where. West, maybe. Or the man had died and the widow had gone to people. He wasn't sure there'd been a death. He wasn't sure of anything. He was chewing while he told me, and it was nothing to him, and it was the ground going out from under me. I looked for them. Not hard enough, I will say that plain. It is the shame of my life that I did not look harder, but I asked, for years, at every railhead and cattle town and land office I passed through. Ashby, a homesteader named Ellis, a woman named Nora, a child. It is a big country and it swallows folk whole, and there are 10,000 Elises, and the plains do not keep records of who was kind to whom. The trail went cold and then it was gone, and I stopped asking, though I never stopped carrying it. And here is the thing I have to tell you, the thing that is the whole reason I am telling you any of this. I got rich. I built the Cross-H into the biggest outfit in 3 counties. I paid every other debt I ever made, paid them early and paid them full, and I got a name as a hard, fair man who was death on anyone who owed him and death on his own owing. And the whole time, under all of it, there was the one account I could not close, running, and it gnawed. It gnawed the way a hunger gnaws when you cannot name what you are hungry for. I would be sitting to a full table in a good house I had built, and there would come over me, out of nowhere, this hollow gone feeling, this sense of a thing left undone, and I would push back from the table and go out and stand in the dark and not know what I wanted. 9 years of that. A man who has everything, and cannot shake the feeling he owes his whole self to somebody he let slip through his hands. I had near made my peace with dying owing it, And then, in the spring of my 50th year, at a cattle sale at Harmon's Ford, I heard a name across a corral fence, and the swallowed stone in my chest turned over. Two men were talking, the way men do at a sale, idle and mean. One of them was a note holder named Rufus Kell. I knew him some. A soft-handed man who bought up the paper on failing outfits and squeezed. A man who had never in his life stood in the snow but had put plenty of other folks out into it. He was saying how he'd finally get the quill-bottom quarter he'd been after, come the first of the month. On account of the widow up there couldn't make her note, and he wasn't of a mind to carry her another season. And the other man said, "The Ashby woman." Kell said, "Ashby, that's the one. Widow Ashby. Man died on her 3 winters back, and she's tried to hold it alone with them 2 children, and I give her credit. She's a stubborn one, but stubborn don't make a payment." I stood very still on my side of that fence. I had spent 9 years looking across a whole territory for a name, and here it was 2 feet from me over a corral rail, dropped careless out of the mouth of the meanest man in the county, and attached to a piece of ground I had ridden away from with my head down 26 years before. She was widowed. She was on the quill still or on it again. I could not tell which, and it did not matter. She was 3 winters a widow with 2 children and a note she could not pay, and a man like Rufus Kell circling her the way the cold had circled me, waiting to put her out. And I was the richest man in 3 counties, with a full shelf and a full purse, and an account behind my ribs 9 years overdue. I did not go home to the Crossage that night. I found out from the land office everything Kell had let slip and more, the amount of the note, the date it came due, the whole sorry arithmetic of a proud woman losing the ground she'd bled to keep. And then I sat in a room at the Ford's one hotel, and I did not sleep, and I did not know yet how I would do this, only that the not doing of it was over. Because you do not get many chances in a life to pay the debt that made you. Most men never get the one. The snow takes the giver, or the years do, and you go to your grave hollow. I had been handed mine back across a corral fence, and I would have ridden through the killing dark itself to reach it. In the morning, I turned the Crossage's business over to my foreman for as long as it took, and I saddled a horse, and I rode down into the quill bottom to find the woman who had once fed a dying stranger out of a shelf that had to last, and to find out whether a debt like that can ever really be paid, and if it can't, what a man does with the rest of it. I had no plan for what I'd say. I only knew this much, riding down through the green new cottonwoods with the river running high and brown beside me and the mud sucking at my horse's feet. I would not come at her with pity. Nora Ashby had told me herself, at a stove, 26 years gone, that a body too proud to be helped is doing the snow's work for it. I understood now that pride cuts both ways, and that the surest way to send a proud woman out into the cold was to ride up like a rich man come to save her. She would shut the door on charity. She had shut nothing on a dying man, but she would shut a good stout door on a savior, and I would deserve it. No, I would come at her with the truth, which was the only honest thing I had. I would come as a man who owed her, come at last to pay. The old cabin still stood on the rise above the bottom, weathered near black now, and there was a poor crop of new corn in below it, fighting the wet, and a milk cow, and a mended fence, and everywhere the marks of 1 grown woman and 2 small children doing the work of a whole family and not quite keeping up. A boy of about 9 came out of the barn with a bucket when he heard my horse, a serious dark-headed boy who set the bucket down slow and squared himself in front of it, in front of the whole place, the way a man does, though he did not yet come up to the middle of my chest. He put himself between me and the door. "This is Ashby ground," he said. "My ma's not buying and she's not selling, and if you're the note man's man you can ride back and tell him she'll have it." Lord, but he had her in him, that level look. I got down off my horse slow so as not to loom, and I took my hat off, which is a thing I do not do for many, and I said, "I'm not the note man's man, son. My name is Cole Hartigan. A long time ago, before you were thought of, Your ma and your pa took a dying man in out of the snow and saved his life and asked nothing for it. I'm that man, and I've come a long way to pay a debt." And the cabin door opened and she stood in it. She stood in the doorway with a dish towel still in one hand, and she was 50-some years old now, and worn the way ground gets worn when it has carried too much for too long, but I knew her. I would have known her in the dark. It was the eyes, level gray and steady, taking me in full and slow the way Ellis used to, deciding about me, and I stood there in her yard with my hat in my hands and let her decide. "Cole Hartigan," she said, not a question. She was turning the name over, matching it to a young ruined man 26 winters gone. "You lived." "I lived," I said, "on account of you." For a moment something moved across her face, something that was almost gladness, and then I watched her put it away, watched the shutters come down, because a woman alone with 2 children and a note past due cannot afford gladness at a strange rich man riding into her yard, and she knew what I was now. You could not look at my horse and my coat and not know it. Word gets down even to the Quill Bottom about who holds the biggest outfit in 3 counties. "You've done well for yourself," she said, and there was no envy in it and no warmth either. It was flat as the table she'd fed me at. "I'm glad of it. You don't owe us anything, Mr. Hartigan. I told you that a long time ago." "You did," I said. "I remember every word of it. You told me a body too proud to be helped is doing the snow's work for it." She had not expected me to have it by heart. I saw that land. Her hand tightened on the dish towel. "And you told me," I went on, because I had one chance to say this right and I would not fumble it, to pay it on down the line, "that someday there'd be somebody in the snow at my door. Ma'am, I have paid it down the line. I have taken in more cold men than I can count on your account because I could not find you to pay it to you direct, but it never squared. And I'll tell you why plain, since we're plain people. It's because you're not down the line from me. You're the top of the line. You're the one it all comes from. And a man can pour water down a hill his whole life, and it don't ever run back up to the spring." The boy Ash, I would learn his name was, for his pa Ellis had wanted a piece of himself in it, looked between the 2 of us, not following, but knowing enough to feel the weight in the yard. Behind Nora in the doorway a smaller shape appeared, a girl of maybe 6, all dark eyes, gripping her mother's skirt. Nora looked at me a long moment. Then she said, tired, "You've come to give me money." "I've come to pay a debt," I said. "There's a difference, and you taught it to me. You didn't give Cole Hartigan charity that winter. You saved a life, and you asked me to pass it on, and you sent me off with a horse and $11 and let me keep my back straight the whole time. That's not charity. That's a debt done in a way that don't cost a man his pride. I mean to pay it the same way." "There's no way to do that," she said. "That isn't charity to a widow who can't make her note, whatever pretty words you dress it in." And she was right, and she knew she was right, and I loved her a little in that moment for being too honest to let me lie us both comfortable. Though I did not yet know it was love. I thought it was only the old debt turning over. "Maybe," I said, "so I won't dress it up. Here's the plain shape of it. I've a lot of ground and not enough men I trust, and I'm getting to an age where I'd rather not sleep in a line camp. I need a place down in this bottom country to run some stock and a person to see to it who won't rob me. I'll pay wages and I'll pay rent on the ground in the barn. That's not charity. That's a hard man getting a fair thing for his money. And if the wages and the rent happen to come to about what a note past due comes to, well, that's my arithmetic to do, and none of Rufus Kell's." The name went into her like a splinter. "You know about Kell?" "I heard him at the Ford sale," I said, bragging across a corral fence how he'd have the Quill Bottom quarter come the 1st of the month, off a widow who tried to hold it alone. He gave you credit for being stubborn. I turned my hat once in my hands. I've known Rufus Kell 20 years. He has never in his life stood in snow, but he has put a deal of folks out into it. I'd take it as a kindness, ma'am, a debt paid, to be the reason he don't get your ground." She was quiet. The river ran below us, high and brown and loud with spring, and I saw her doing the arithmetic that a proud person does, which is not the arithmetic of dollars but the arithmetic of what a thing will cost your spine, and I saw her weighing her straight back against the two children behind her, and I knew, because I had once sat at her table too proud to eat until she'd shamed me out of it, I knew which way a good mother weighs that scale. Wages and rent, she said slowly. Fair market. And you keep your account and I keep mine, and there's no gift in it anywhere. If I ever find a gift hid in the sums, Mr. Hartigan, I'll turn you off this ground and take my chances with Kell. I mean that. I'd expect nothing less of you, I said. You were never one to eat a man's charity, nor to serve it, I'd guess. Something in her mouth eased not a smile but the ghost of where one lived. No, she said, I never was. And that is how I came to stay in the Quill Bottom. I will not pretend it went soft and easy from there, because it did not, and Nora Ashby would call me a liar from wherever she is now if I told it that way. It went slow, and it went prickly, and it went $1 at a time, because she watched the sums like a hawk watches a field, and more than once she caught me trying to pay too much for too little and made me do it over honest. When I offered $40 rent on a barn worth $20, she handed back the $20 and told me to keep the rest or find another barn. When I happened to leave a side of good beef in the cold house, she loaded it back on my horse herself and told me her children ate what their own labor bought and not one bite more, and that if I wanted to feed somebody, I could go find a cold man on the road, there being always one, and pay it down the line where it belonged. I want to tell you how that made me feel, being handed my own debt back to carry. It made me feel, for the first time in 9 years, that the hollow thing under my ribs had a bottom to it after all. Because a debt you cannot pay is a torment, but a debt somebody will only let you pay honest, a little at a time, in fair work, that is not a torment. That is a purpose. She would not let me buy my way out of what I owed her in one grand stroke and be quit of her. She made me stay and work, and earn the paying of it day on day. And in the making me do that she gave me the thing I had truly been starving for all those years at my full table, which was not to be forgiven the debt, but to be allowed to pay it slow enough that I got to keep her. We worked that bottom together through the planting. I brought down 100 head of good stock, and we ran them on the high ground above the flood line. And I mended what 9 years and a river and a dead man's absence had let go, the fences, the barn roof, the wheel of the well that had gone dry-throated and screaming. I taught the boy Ash to throw a rope and to read a cow, and he took to it grave and hungry, the way a boy does who has been the man of a place too young, and is glad past saying to have a man beside him at last. The girl, Ruth, for Nora had named her for a grandmother, Ruth got over her shyness of me by degrees, the way a barn cat does, and took to riding up on my saddlebow of an evening while I checked the stock, and telling me the long, serious business of a 6-year-old's whole day. And I, who had never had a child nor thought I wanted one, found I would have set my hand in a fire before I'd have let a hair of that child come to harm. And Nora and I, in the evenings, on the porch of that black old cabin with the river talking below, and the children finally down, Nora and I got to know each other, slow, the way two grown people do who have both buried things and learned not to hope out loud. She told me about Ellis, how his bad leg had turned bad at the last, and the fevers, and the 3 winters she'd held the place alone by main strength and stubbornness since. She did not tell it for pity. She told it plain, the way she did all things, and I told her plain in return about the ruined years and the climbing and the getting rich and the hollow feeling at the full table that I had never told a living soul. And she listened the way she'd once warmed the blood back into my hands, without scolding, letting it hurt as it came. "You've been carrying us a long time," she said one night, wondering at it. "All this while in your chest." "I have," I said. "That's a strange thing," she said, "to be carried so long by a man who didn't know if I was alive. Ellis is 3 years gone, and there's days I feel him less than that." "Ellis was easy to carry," I said. "You loved him and you knew where he was. What eats a man is the debt he can't find the door of. You were the door I couldn't find." She was quiet a while. Then she said low, "And now you've found it." "Now I've found it," I said. Neither of us said the rest of it, but it was there on that porch between us, in the dark, warm as the room had rolled out over me that first winter. The understanding growing that the debt was not the only thing left in the room anymore. That somewhere in the mending of fences and the teaching of a boy to rope and the long plain evenings, the account I had come to settle had quietly become a thing I no longer wanted settled, because to settle it was to be done, and I was not ever going to be done. I did not have the words for it yet. I only knew I had stopped, of an evening, thinking of the ledger and started thinking of her. But Rufus Kell had not gone anywhere. He rode into the yard the second week of June, soft-handed on a good horse he had never earned the sweat of, and he did not get down, which told me what he thought of the people he'd come to see. He had papers in his coat and a look on him like a man who has already spent money he hasn't collected. "Widow Ashby," he called out, not troubling with a hat. "The note's due the 1st, and I want to walk the ground before then and see what I'm." And then he saw me come around the corner of the barn, and the words dried up in his soft throat, because whatever else Rufus Kell was, he was not a man who failed to know who held the biggest outfit in 3 counties. "Hartigan," he said, and you could watch him doing new arithmetic. "Didn't look to find you down in the bottom." "I run stock here now," I said, and I came and stood at Nora's shoulder, not in front of her. She'd have skinned me for stepping in front of her on her own ground, but beside her, which was a different thing, and I'd learned the difference. Rent the barn and the high pasture off Mrs. Ashby. Good arrangement. I'd hate to see it disturbed. Kell's eyes went from me to Nora and back, and I watched the greed in him wrestle with the caution, and I knew this was the hinge of the whole thing, that a man like Kell would fold if you made folding cost him less than fighting, but that he would fight and fight dirty, the second he smelled that you cared, because caring is a thing his kind knows how to squeeze. So I did not let him see that I cared. I let him see only the hard, fair man who was death on anyone's owing, the name he'd heard for 20 years. "The note's mine to call," Kell said, but slower now. "It is," I agreed. "For 8 more days, then it's the 1st and it gets paid and it's nobody's." His head came up. "Paid she can't." "I didn't say who paid it," I said.